now, we're talking with Stillman Valley Athletic Director Mike Reagan, and we're talking about a issue that has just recently come up again in New Jersey. In New Jersey, they've decided to separate public and private schools in football playoffs. That means the public schools will just play publics and privates would just play privates. And Mike, I know that you've had some thoughts about this in the past, about the public versus private issue. What did you think about that New Jersey information that just came out?
Well, I thought it was interesting, Dave, because I know there's been talk in Illinois about doing that or people wanting to do that. Certainly, it affects lots of schools in our conference, and I think it's interesting to look at. And now with IHSA changing their seeding for the playoff, going 1 through 16 for the smaller classes, and then 1 through 32 for the big ones, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
When you look at all this, I know, next year when the Big Northern is just the Big Northern, you'll have two private schools in there, Rockford Christian and Rockford Lutheran. Is there some concerns with having two private schools? That's very unusual for public schools and private schools to be in conferences together. In some ways, during the regular season, they are separated, but to have two private schools in a conference is a little bit different than a lot of them that we see around here.
It is unique. We do have in most schools in our conference, we all have great relationships with each other. But there's definitely, public versus private. The fundamental difference is, our kids are our kids. If you live in district, you go here. Small schools, and it's not even, people say that, well, they recruit. Well, they're a business, and I understand that. They have to get students in. Otherwise, they don't stay open. And they can limit their enrollment. So there's certainly some issues when it comes to, looking at a team like Lutheran who's been very successful. And so successful, the IHSA wants to punish them by making them 4A in basketball this year. Mm-hmm. So again, that looks at that multiplier, and does it work? Does it not work? What really is the best system? And that's what we need to take a look at.
I think we saw that in some of the football stuff. I think like Montini went up and they still won a private school, and then you talk about Lutheran. They had to go up for the multiplier and the success factor. Does it seem like there's a better solution for Illinois than what they're doing right now?
Well, the easy one is to say, okay, have separate state championships, public schools 1, and then private schools 2. I'm sure the IHSA doesn't want to do that because that's a lot more work and a lot more money. There are some public school people who do not want to do that also. That's definitely the easy way to do it. I know they've been working to find a fair solution. As you mentioned, Montini, they won it in 4A, a few years ago. Then they go to 5A, and they're taking first or second. This year they go to 6. And a school like that, a program like that, it doesn't seem to matter. They're just that good.
When you look at all this stuff, if they did separate, would you still think the Big Northern Conference schools, the public schools, would still want to play some of the private schools? I know that's a concern about scheduling, filling everybody's schedule up, and especially the private schools where they would have to really travel a lot.
I think there'd still be, we're fortunate here with the geography. There would still be some games played between, public schools and private schools. Within the region and in all the sports. Last year, if you remember that district playoff or district football format that was proposed, that was, one of the issues where, one school could be going and playing 4 different private schools and kind of be in a quandary. So there's still enough positive relationships between the public and private that I'm sure they'd still be playing each other.
For a situation that you'll face in basketball this year, sure, Lutheran goes up to 4, but now Boylan comes down to 3A, which you guys are in, and they also have probably one of their best teams they've had in 5 or 6 years, so now you faced that problem with another private school, so that's kind of a concern as well, isn't it?
It is. We started, we've traditionally for basketball, especially, it's a 2A school. Mm-hmm. And, you take a look at our boys' team, we're definitely rebuilding and getting better. But then you look at our conference, and then you look at 3A. You go from Winnebago, and then you have Dixon, and then you have, Lutheran, and then you have Boylan or Sycamore. Here we are at the very small end of 3A, and we're taking on schools that are going to be dominant, week, day in, day out.
When you look at all this, do you think the success factor and multiplier are steps in the right direction, or would you rather? I mean, if you had to vote on, say, your school system and maybe some of the other schools that are private or public in the area, that there should be just separate and try it and see what happens, or what have you been thinking about this?
I would, if it was up to me, or if I had a vote, I would vote for public versus or public, being separate from private, and see what happens when it comes to state championships. If you look at football or even volleyball is another one, you find a lot of the championship games, it's private versus private to begin with. In the smaller classes, it's public versus public typically. And I think it would be neat to take a look at to see, how that works. And one thing that we leave out in this is Chicago, where they have open enrollment. Phillips is a public school, but how public are they?
Yeah, they're real public.
Exactly. And congratulations to them. We played them last year, and they showed us what a bunch of D1 athletes look like on the football field. But again, that's another situation where Chicago is treated differently than whether it's private schools or public schools.
You look at this and people say, well, that's pretty, a fanatical move to go from public to private. But states like Georgia, Florida, Texas, and then there's a few other states that I know of, California, and some of those states, they have like separate, issues with private and public. So it's not really a foreign idea. And after a while, you don't hear much more about that when those states do that.
Right. I think anytime there's change, you hear the grumbling, and then after a couple of years, if everything's working, you don't hear it anymore. They're still grumbling with the multiplier and the success factor because A, it hasn't been in long enough, but B is how is it really working? Those schools, especially the dominant ones, they can bring in more kids if they have to compete at whatever class they're in football or volleyball. They can restrict those types of things. So it's not a, as you said, it's not a drastic idea. Other states have done it, and some states, I do believe, went to it and then got away from it. Found it didn't work. So again, I'm just looking to see what's best for our kids, what's best for schools such as us, and again, finding the best solution.
Some of our neighbors to the east, I'm familiar with Indiana and Ohio, they implemented a success factor, but it included everybody, not just private but public schools, with winning championships. And in Illinois, a school like Rochester, who didn't get to state this year, had won like 5 in a row. You don't like that idea probably at all, or what do you think about that?
I don't know if the success factor for all public schools is, what determines that? Is that the school, is that the location? Yeah,
they depended on if you win, kind of like Illinois, if you win state championships and, things like that, and how successful you've been in the past. Like if you win a couple of state championships, which some schools do in Ohio, they would move you up no matter if you're a public or a private. Like Rochester would have been moved up real easy. So
sure, it seems like around here that could create some kind of demographic issues. Because now, are you bringing in, are you the wealthy suburb? Are you the small town, farming community out, one county, co-op school district? Because if you have that great class that comes through, and then they leave, then what happens? Are you punished then? Are you brought up to 2A after winning a 1A state, even though you were a senior-dominated team? It would be interesting to take a look at that to see how many people that would affect.
Yeah. When you look at all this, and we brought it up a little bit, you brought it up about Chicago. I'll put you on the hot seat a little bit. The IHSA, is there ways that maybe they could control this a little bit better? When they did the success factor, they took it away, then they put it on and didn't tell anybody after people had scheduled. They made some changes. And with Chicago, basically, there are no transfer rules in Chicago or any of the areas. And I go through a lot of those cases, and I know people see the hub, see that there are a lot of issues where kids just get up and leave to go somewhere. Could we have maybe a different way, or the IHSA could handle that better to help you out as a public school?
I don't know. I know the IHSA works hard to do it. I guess my main response would be, does the state of Illinois control Chicago?
No.
I mean, how do you resolve, something as large as CPS, where I know the IHSA listens to the schools and tries to, make things fair and equal to everybody. They say that their goal is not to match up the two best teams in the final.
Yeah.
It's to determine a champion. But then what are the procedures in place to make those determinations?
So do you think that we'll see?
That would be a good one.
Do you think someday we'll see in the future some changes in all of this in Illinois, or do you think it's just going to drag on like it probably has for the last maybe 15, 20 years?
Well, if Illinois politics are an example, it's going to drag on. I do know, speaking to a lot of people after this year's state championships, and you probably heard the same thing, we just couldn't believe the scores.
Yeah.
And the private schools that played, even if you want to throw in the 4A, Phillips game in there, they just dominated. And maybe with the exception of Cary Grove, which is in, a yearly power, what do you do? At some point, you may reach that peak where people get fed up with it. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think they'll continue to take a look at it.
Well, thanks, Mike, for taking time out. I know we've discussed this back and forth in internet and on email and things like that. It's an interesting subject, and if we had the right solution, I guess all 50 states would use it. So I sure appreciate you taking time today, because it's kind of a difficult subject.
It is, Dave. I appreciate you covering it, and again, it's just ideas, and we all want what's best for our own kids. And if we can come up with better solutions than what's currently in place, then that's our goal.
Thanks so much, Mike. We've been talking to Stillman Valley Athletic Director Mike Reagan, and we've been talking about public versus private. For the StatelineSportsHub.com, I'm Dave Schmidt.